Hey, Launch family. In today's interview, we talk with Will Hamilton. He is a multi-seven-figure entrepreneur who is teaching people how to play tennis online and actually has worked with some of the best tennis players in the world to create courses. This includes Martina Navratilova or the Bryan brothers. You may have heard of them. And this episode is all about championship mindset. But Will is also a comedian. So we talk about how comedy has influenced marketing in his business. It's a really jam-packed, awesome episode. I think you're going to love it. But I wanted to let you know we have something special for you before you start. This is a surprise bonus from this episode. I don't want to give it away, but if you text bonus 3 to 1-888-530-0282, you're going to receive this bonus surprise one absolutely free. So text bonus with the number 3 at the end to 1-888-530-0282 and receive that bonus absolutely free. Now, here's today's Dare to Launch.
I remember they called me to offer the job, and I said, I really appreciate the offer. I'm actually going to start a tennis website in my parents' basement. And there was just crickets on the other end of the line. 14 months after I initially bought PLF, we did a launch with the Bryans, which did 400K. I realized that all of the techniques that are used in comedy, we also use in marketing and direct response copywriting. I think with anything, when you're talking about peak performance, it's just like you got to put in the reps. The type of person that's going to leave a mean comment, that's not someone's opinion that you should worry about whatsoever. And I want all the pickleball people to know that I am your enemy.
Hello, Launch family. So happy to have you listening to today's episode. My name is Chris, and as always, I am joined today with my co-host, Mr. Jeff Walker.
Hey, folks.
And today we have a very special guest for you. He is the co-founder of FuzzyYellowBalls.com, where he has worked with some of the greatest players and minds in tennis for them to share their secrets with you. He's also a longstanding member of Jeff's Platinum Plus Mastermind Group and all around a pretty funny guy, Mr. Will Hamilton. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Well, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Fuzzy Yellow Balls and you already, could you tell us a little bit about your business and what you do and your expertise?
Sure. Yeah. So I teach tennis on the internet, and I've played my entire life. And so my dad, my parents are players. And so I as soon as I could hold a racket at 5, I've been playing ever since. But after I graduated college, it was right around when YouTube was getting popular. So I started uploading instructional videos to YouTube, and to everyone's surprise, including my own, people started watching them. And it sort of evolved from there. We can get into the weeds later, but evolved from there, and we attracted the attention of some professional tennis players. First, it was Bob and Mike Bryan, who are the best men's doubles team of all time. And then after that, we got to work with Martina Navratilova, who's one of the greatest tennis players of all time. She sort of transcends the sport. So it's been a wild ride.
And Jeff, go way back. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, Jeff, like, how did you guys meet? How did you come together as friends, and I guess in the mastermind as well?
Yeah. So and everybody listening should know Jeff is quite an accomplished tennis player. So he's got a pretty nasty forehand. So I try and direct most shots to the backhand. But we did not meet on a tennis court in about, I started in 2007. And then for a couple years, we were getting a lot of eyeballs, but we didn't know how to monetize any of our content. And so we had started a membership site that was kind of limping along. And I remember in 2009, Jeff, you launched PLF. Let's say this is in the fall of 2009. And I didn't have $2,000 to buy it. And so you do the launch, whatever. And then about 8 months later, let's say June of 2010, you launch PLF again. And this time I was determined to get it. Still didn't have $2,000. So I went to my parents. I was like, look, I need $2,000 to buy this thing. And they were like, absolutely not. You've been doing this for a couple of years. Like, maybe this is not going to work out. And I was like, I'm convinced this dude knows what he's talking about. And I eventually convinced them to lend me $2K. And then I bought PLF, and then a week later, I think I'd gone through like module 1. I hadn't even finished the whole thing. I just sort of guessed as to what all of the pieces of a launch would be. But we did a launch for our membership. We had made $70K in the like year leading up to that. And then that first week of that launch, we made $35,000. And everyone was just blown away. Like, this is unbelievable. Paid my parents back. A couple months later, we did our next launch. That was $65,000. A couple months after that, we were up to 105, then 170. And then that's when we were able to connect with the Bryan brothers. And like a little, maybe 14 months after I initially bought PLF, we did a launch with the Bryans, which did 400K. So it was just that I still vividly remember 2010 into 2011 because it was such sort of a hockey stick in terms of where the business was and then where we ended up.
Wow.
That's nuts.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you tell your parents when you gave them the money back? Was there any conversation there around that? I'm curious.
Man, I wish I knew. I wish I remembered. That would have been, there wasn't any dramatic moment where I like slammed 2K down on the kitchen table, which would have been a power move. No, I think I don't know what I did. I think everybody was just so sort of shocked. And after so many years of kind of limping along, we're like, there's something here now. This is actually got some momentum.
Wow. That's such a great story.
Will, do you remember the conversation you had when you asked your parents and they said, maybe not so much, no way, but somehow you convinced them? Do you remember? Because a lot of people have folks in there, loving folks that care deeply for them, that don't necessarily believe in their vision and try to discourage it even. So there's a lot of people that have folks that are doubting them.
Yeah. Man, I don't know if I have the best. I remember when we first launched our membership site, like fast forward. So both my parents always were super supportive, as you would want your parents to be, also sprinkled in with maybe a dose of reality. And when we first launched our membership site, which is like $25 a month, I remember we launched it, and then my email client would ding when we got an email, and it was like a notification somebody bought. So I'm there with my co-founder, business partner, Adam, who's like my best friend from first grade. Our email client dings, and we start high-fiving, and we like threw a bunch of $1 bills in the air to make it rain and sort of celebrate our first sale ever. And then we looked at who bought it, and it was my mom. They're like, all right, well, let's put the money back in the wallets and wait for the next one. It dings. And again, we do the exact same thing. And this time it's Adam's mom. And I don't know if they coordinated it or not, but it ended up like, it made sales the first day, and we were happy about it. And then it sort of flatlined. And I just remember that for the 2K thing, when I was looking at PLF, my dad was here and my mom was in Sweden because she is Swedish. So she was on a trip. So I had to like coordinate my pressure campaign across multiple continents and time zones. But going back to the question you're asking is like, there's people that's doubting them. And so how do you either convince them or I don't know if I have the best advice for that. I think my advice is more from a tennis player's perspective is ultimately, tennis, you're out there by yourself and you have to believe that you can win this match and nobody else can help you. And everybody wants you to succeed. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's actually got to believe in yourself and do it. That's sort of more the way I approach things.
I mean, our mutual friend, Barry Baumgartner, she says that your uncertainty has to overcome their uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And I've always loved that phrase. I mean, you just have to go in and instead of, and I don't know how the conversation went with your parents, but it's just like, yeah, this is going to work. This is going to work. And I'm certain, and this is why. And not asking so much for permission, but just just showing why it's going to work.
I also think with friends and family, it's not coming from a place of like, you can't do this. I think a lot of time it's coming from a place of like, we want the best for you and we care about you. And a lot of people, when they don't have an entrepreneurial mindset, they obviously default to safety, like get a 9-to-5, that's safe, and you're going to be like good to go. So I never view it as like, oh, these people are, I don't know if out to get me is the right term, but it's more just like they want the best for you, and this is what they think the best is, and it's perfectly fine for you to not agree with that. So I never get sort of offended or mad that someone's like, I don't know if this is a good idea. I'm just like, I get where you're coming from. I just happen to disagree. I see where you're coming from. I see your perspective, but I just happen to disagree with it. But it's hard. First, it's for the folks who haven't started yet. I get it. Like I remember when you haven't made that first sale, you're like, do people want my stuff? Like I get I still remember it. I think everybody probably remembers their first sale, the first one they make, because that is sort of the validation. Like, oh, I do have something here. But at the end of the day, you just there's no certainty. You gotta just try it, see what happens.
You have built a pretty huge platform now of experts that you've worked with. And I'm curious, like you've worked with some of the top tennis players' minds out there. How did you do that? Like, how did you go about actually getting to the point of just being, this guy with a website and now having like top players actually want to work with you, or you working with them to design courses?
Yeah. The advantage of, whether it's tennis or I think in many industries, if you've got famous talent, is they're going to have representation. They're going to have agents, and it's the agent's job to bring them deals. So the lucky part for me was there was an agency. I live in Washington D.C. and there just happened to be an agent that lives in D.C. that represents a lot of players, and so we got connected through mutual tennis circles. I sort of told him what I was up to. And then when he heard some of this was right as we were doing these launches where I was like, man, this is crazy. Like, these numbers that we're doing. And so obviously he's then, well, I should talk to Will about working with my clients, because then they get this is a way for me to generate revenue for my clients. And then once we had the success with the Bryans, then it kind of became easy, because it's just a matter of getting connected with other agents and be like, here are the results. And then they're obviously incentivized to bring these deals to their talent. So I think for any industry or whatever market you might be in, I would look to see if you're thinking about working with talent, it's try and figure out who their representation is. I think a simple way to approach it is figure out what their day rate is and then offer them a good percentage more, and they're going to pay attention to that offer, and then you can sort of negotiate it from there. But that's make them a serious offer, and then and obviously you got to make sure your numbers work out. But that would be they're going to respond. Let me put it that way. When
you worked with the Bryan brothers, that was, if I recall, that you were in Platt at that point, right?
Yeah, I was. So in June 2010 was when I bought PLF, and then you did the first PLF live in October. So, things were working so well. I was like, man, I got to go to this event. You offered the mastermind, you offered Platt. And I was like, well, if the course worked this well, then the mastermind will probably be like, jet fuel. And it was.
Because I remember planning, like literally helping you plan that out.
Yep.
The conversation with them and then that launch, and then $400,000. It was just
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must have done a hot seat about it. Can't remember what the hot seat was, but I'm sure I had, because I did a hot seat when I was about to do the Navratilova thing as well.
Yeah. What has it been like working with just champions, people who are at the top of their game? The Bryan brothers, the best men's doubles team ever. Martina, I don't know how long she was world number one.
Long time, long years.
Yeah, I mean, these are people that, achieve at the absolute highest level.
Yeah.
and actually I've heard a little bit because, my son Dan helped you.
Yeah.
Was there for the video shoot with Martina, and he told me a little bit about what he took away from her mindset on that day and how she showed up. What did you take away?
Yeah. Are you asking about like how I showed up to the shoot, or just the mindset of a champ? Like, these are the greatest.
Well, actually both. Actually,
both would be awesome. Yeah.
Actually, both, because Dan told me about both. Because for those of you something that hasn't come out yet, for those of you listening, is Will is a bit of a comedian, and it's hard to get a straight answer. He's being nice so far in this podcast.
So far.
But there is a very long history of us giving each other a hard time, and everyone in the Platt group giving Will a hard time, but I know what Dan said. It's like, yeah, Will, when he showed up there, he was like on his game. He was, just showed up like a complete badass. So yeah, I'd like to hear both.
How do you feel about the fact that I show up at shoots like that, but not at the Platt meetings?
I'm offended, personally offended.
Okay, you should be. Yeah, I walk into the Platt meeting and I'm like, who can I troll first? What wrench can I throw in this operation?
This is a group of people in that mastermind that have, a lot of them, like Will, have been in it for since 2010, and probably the average tenure in the group is 6 or 7 years. So they know each other really well, and they tend to they can give each other a hard time.
It was honestly an evolution in terms of how I had figured it out by the time Dan showed up. So in 2011 is when we shot with the Bryans, and I'm 29 at the time. I had done some prep work in terms of surveying my audience about what they wanted to hear from, but I showed up like pretty, honestly, looking back, like unprepared, certainly unprepared by my standards now, about like, what are we going to, I was just like, let's just talk about doubles, was literally kind of like how we started. And Bob and Mike, it was total luck. They were unbelievably prepared, not specifically for me, but they just were like, here are all the drills we do. Here's the strategy. Like, I could not have been luckier in the sense that they like basically just they had all the content for the program mapped out, and it was like completely coherent and unbelievable. I also got spoiled with that because then I assumed every tennis player would be like that. So we worked with some other talent where I showed up and I was like, all right, we're going to talk about this. And they're like, all right, how do you want to talk about it? And I was like, I thought you knew how to talk about it. And like literally the first couple hours of shoot, I was like, we just paid a ton of money, and like, this is going to be garbage unless we figure out what to do. And we salvaged it, did great. But it was a learning experience for me. And then by the time we were working with Martina, and it was 2016, when Dan helped out, we had it like I had spent a lot of time preparing for that. And so that one was dialed in. I mean, that one was just like, this is what we're going to talk about. And at that point, I realized the trick is you got to assume they've done no prep, and you want to frame basically the questions you ask. They can just like answer, like snap answer. It's going to be what you want, or it's kind of like go in the direction that you want it to go. And so they don't have to do any prep work before, obviously not after either. Cause like these shoots, you have these people for a very limited amount of time. I think we had Martina for like 7 hours or something like that. And so you got to be super, super efficient with that time. In terms of the mindset of champions, I mean, it's the bros, Bob and Mike, we call them the bros, are pretty laid back. And obviously they're super focused on when they play a match. Some people you can just sort of tell they're kind of like they have a level of intensity. And they once we were, even during the shoot, like even during the takes, they were pretty laid back. Martina was a little bit more like focused and on it, and like you could just sense this like underlying intensity, like that made her so good. Like you standing next to her, be like, okay, I get it. Like I get why you have 50. I think she had like 59 Grand Slam doubles, just some outrageous number. And just being there with her, like, oh, I understand. Like, you cross every T and dot every I. Like, I get it. Like, that's so. I don't know if there's any necessary one way that these champs think. I think with Martina, it was the most obvious why she was as good as she was.
Yeah, I remember Dan saying, I think that that was incredibly hot that day. Like he said, like 100 degrees.
One of them was hot. Yeah, it was 90, 100 or something. It was up there. Palm Springs, California. Yeah.
And here's this person who's won all these Grand Slams, who's number one, who, you know, doesn't have to show up at a film shoot with intensity, but Dan said she was like all about it and 100% about making sure you got what you need.
And it was the part that was funny to me is you had we had to get hitting partners, right? So you get, people who are good players, like high level college players, because you need them to be able to hit the ball in a sequence to like demonstrate the various strategies, tactics. They're out there hitting with Navratilova, so they're like, especially early, there's a level of like nerves associated with that. And I just remember one dude like couldn't miss shot after shot, and I kind of looked over at Martina, and you could see she's just like, just the facial expression was like, "Come on, dude," It was it's just a moment I find highly amusing, just because she's demanding, like, let's make this happen,
I remember Dan telling me like he had maybe a drone shot or something, and she went to hit the tennis ball near the shot.
No, she hit it. So like another example, how this drone is like way overhead, and she hit the ball at it and hit the drone. And like we have the video of the ball hitting the camera, and the drone didn't crash or anything. But it was also like, man, you're pretty accurate with this thing.
It just sounds like they have a level of standards that not only for themselves, but just that trickles out to everywhere around them too, right? That level of demand upon themselves.
I heard an interesting, I had never thought of tennis. I literally was listening to a podcast yesterday. I never thought of tennis like this. Is in a way, it's a horrendous job, particularly as a professional athlete, because with the NBA or the NFL, your game is at 7:00 or it's at 1:00. But with tennis, you are playing every single week. There's a tournament every single week, and you have no idea what time you are playing until they release the schedule the night before. So you could be playing in the morning, or you could be playing at 7 p.m. Matches could run long. You could start at midnight, which happens at like the U.S. Open. Like matches have ended at 3 a.m. And so the level of discipline required to go through all of your routines, which is warm up, practice, also cool down. Like after the match, you spend an hour at least, like slowing your body down so you don't get stiff and the inflammation doesn't build up. But then doing that for 10 months out of the year and not going out, not partying, which is hard when you're in your 20s. You're rich, you're famous, you're in a new city every week. I mean, there's a lot of players who do that, and it shows in their results. And then the ones like Federer, Nadal, Djokovic don't, and you can tell.
It's kind of like business. There's a lot of things in business you have to do, right? And there's processes that need to happen in order for it to be successful. And that discipline around creating those habits that make your business successful are key for any entrepreneur. And athletes, they just don't get anywhere if they don't have that level of discipline, right? You can never get to that level. So, for our listeners who are maybe not trying to be the next tennis open champion, but are just trying to start their own business, being able to create the right habits and have that like level of discipline around what really works and what is going to make the difference for them being successful. I think that's a big lesson to take from championship attitude.
The advantage of business is you can still go out and have some beers.
And you don't have to be number one in the world. Tennis is brutal. I think, isn't it? Like, well, I know, I'm sure you know the numbers better than me, but I think even you have to break the top 100 to even break even. Is that?
Yeah, basically. The numbers might be a little different now, but it was essentially you're breaking even at 100 in the world in terms of the money in your bank account with all the travel and paying your coach, physio, because like the NFL will pay for your travel and the team provides all the support staff, but you got to do that which is a problem, honestly, with the way the tour is structured now.
So you got to be top 100 in business. If you're in the top 100,000, you're incredible.
Killing it. Yeah. You're killing it.
Absolutely crushing it.
What's your line about the game, making the game you want to play or something like that?
We all start out grinding, right? In our businesses, there's always hustle, grind. You're learning, you're trying to build up momentum. at some point when you start to have success, it's time to look around and say, am I playing the game I want to win? And is it to build $1 billion business? I'm not here to build $1 billion business. I'm not willing to make the sacrifices that it would take to build $1 billion business. So I'm playing the game I want to play. And I think I would suggest everyone do that. It's just, there's so many people, there's so much in society that's saying like, oh, you got to get that Ferrari. You got to get that second house. You have to have all these followers. You have to build your business this way. And there's 1,000 ways to build a business, and build the one you want.
You can build a game that you can win at is sort of my takeaway from that quote is basketball has a very set, has a set rule, right? There's a set, like the rim has to be 10 feet tall. And because of those limitations, I'm 5'8". I'm never going to be that good at it, but in business, I can lower the proverbial rim to make it work for what I'm trying to do and win at that game.
I'm curious for you, Will, like, did you have that mentality of like, what were you trying to build at the time when you were starting this? Was this about just like, I just want financial freedom or figure this out? Or were you really looking to get to a specific place? Like, did you have that vision in mind before going after it?
It was probably, it was more just like, I wanted freedom, like what that, like, not just financial, but just time freedom was a big one for me. I had been offered, so I live in D.C. I had been offered a job on the budget committee and on Capitol Hill, which would have been hilarious because I'm dyslexic. So can you imagine how much more we would have been in debt if I had been running the nation's finances? Or we'd be like profitable, and my decision to go into tennis has the course of America. I've ruined it, guys. My bad. Sorry about that.
We needed Will on the budget committee. We'd have a balanced budget by now.
Can you imagine that? Like, that's like the butterfly effect right there. I just ultimately was like, man, this is not what I like. I don't know if you ever interned on the Hill, been up there. It's like it's your life. You're always working. It's 12 hours. It's a meat grinder. I remember they called me to offer the job, and I said, I really appreciate the offer. I'm actually going to start a tennis website in my parents' basement. And there was just crickets on the other end of the line for a good 10 seconds. And then the woman was like, okay, because back then, you're like, what? You're going to make, this is 2006 or 7. It's like, that's an insane thing to become a YouTuber. Now it's a little bit more accepted. Most people know who Mr. Beast is.
Or even you can't teach tennis online.
Well, sure. People still say that, actually. Yeah. Because it's just such a confusing, how does that work? You can't see me hit. It was just freedom, whatever that all-encompassing word means, and the ability to chart my own path and not have anybody tell me what I needed to do or what my day was going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're starting off, they have that sort of, I guess, cloudy dream of freedom or financial freedom or whatever that is. But as you started to get success, did that start to narrow into focus of okay, this is really where I need to go and what I want to do? And I'm curious about vision. And this is something for both of you to talk about because both of you have done this. But when you started getting success, how often did you start revisiting that vision and getting more and more clear about it so that you could take your business and life in that direction?
I don't know if this was necessarily my intention when I first got started, because it was more just I don't want to have a 9 to 5. But now it's very much the business and the way I'm trying to structure my life. It's kind of almost like getting better at things that I find interesting. You mentioned, Jeff, the comedy stuff. I've been doing stand-up comedy for 4 years. That's an interesting thing that I like doing. And what I've built facilitates that. I like playing tennis, and because it's my job, I get to I'm still improving. I'm a better player now than I was in college at 42. So it's sort of a vehicle. I hate to say a vehicle for mastering it sounds so trite, like just getting better at stuff. But that's sort of how I structure my day. It's oh, this is cool because I am improving and growing as a person.
There's so many times where a challenge will come up and I'll either choose to accept it or not based on who I'm going to have to become to meet that challenge. When I started out, I was desperate for money. I was just trying to help support the family. It was utter desperation. And it's like, how can I make some money? And then I found a way to, create value, and people would give me money for it. And that was amazing. And then within a few years, then it was like the goal was to be able to retire my wife, Mary, and have her come home and help me in the business, help me raise the kids. And then at some point in there, it occurred to me I could actually design the business to give me the freedom that Will was talking about. And so I guess every few years, often something would come up in my life to have me step back and like evaluate, where is this business going and where do I want it to go and what could it give me? Then it became a yearly ritual. I would do that at the beginning of each year. And I think coming into this, like part of my gateway into this world was Tony Robbins and buying his personal Power 2 program off the infomercial. And in there, I think it was in there, it's in one of his programs, he had you look at all the areas in your life. And so at some point after the money started to come, then it was like, I don't want to just succeed at business or succeed at money. I want to succeed in all these areas. And I've got a lot of interests. Being a husband and a father was absolutely paramount. And beyond that, I've always considered myself an athlete. That's one of my top identities. So I wanted my business to create the freedom so I could be an athlete. And then being out in the wilderness, being in the woods is a huge thing for me. So I wanted to design a business that would give me that freedom. And then at some point, it's like checked off all of these boxes. And then it's like, okay, what's my life about? And that's a whole different story. It's a much longer story. But at some point, you hit all your goals. And then it's like, what's your life about? And at that point, it was like, okay, it's going to be impact now. Positive impact, help as many people as I can while maintaining all those other things. So yeah, it's just been a constant reinvention for all these years for me.
It sounds like this might be a good time for you to tell us a little bit about, like, you've been doing stand-up comedy for 4 years or so, right? And I'm curious, like, one, like, why did you decide to do that? Was this something you're like, have people been telling you to do that, or you just decided because you're interested? And then how did you approach that? Because I know you had an interesting approach towards doing this, as far as like, okay, being successful and doing this. Did you apply some principles from, say, what you've learned in business and how to master things to what you're doing now in terms of comedy?
Yeah, I thought I was funny. People might disagree, but Jeff is scowling right now. No, but and I'd always wanted to try it. And one year, I think my sister had bought me improv classes, and then I didn't go. I don't know what happened, but it was sort of just like life was in the way. And then actually, ironically, Jeff, I think it was the February 2020 Platt meeting, you brought in a comic named Matt Kazam who does this thing called, I don't know if he's still doing it, but it's the stand-up challenge, where it's like CEOs, entrepreneurs put together a bit. And so we basically did, a couple Platts, including Jeff, who did quite a good job. It's funny. Like, that kind of got me, I was like, okay, like, I thought my thing went pretty good. I basically just roasted everybody else in the room. Then the pandemic, a month later, everything shut down, and I'm in my apartment, stay-at-home order. And so I went on YouTube and typed in, like, how do you write jokes? And I found there was a YouTube channel that had a ton of content. I went back to the dude's website. His name's Jerry Corley, and he did one-on-one Zoom trainings. And he used to write for Leno back for Tonight Show with Jay Leno. So signed up for weekly Zoom classes with him. Still do them every week. And so that kind of got me going. And to your question about, like, how is this? I think you asked me, like, how has it impacted business? When I was really getting into the weeds of how to write jokes, I realized that all of the techniques that are used in comedy, we also use in marketing and direct response copywriting. Analogy jokes. Thing one is like thing two. We in business compare, how does my thing work? Well, it's like a car, because it's, whatever. I think the analogy I use for actually, we have a product called the Singles Playbook. And I was like, if you look at other sports, teams run plays, soccer teams run plays to score goals, football teams run plays to score touchdowns, and basketball teams run plays to score baskets. When it comes to your tennis game, you can run a play to play to your strengths, attack your opponent's weaknesses, and avoid making mistakes. So that would be an example of how I used an analogy. And then there's compare and contrast, where, the typical ones you see in comedy would be like men do this, women do this, white people do this, black people do this. And in marketing, we would compare our product to the status quo. Like, what's already out there? What do people know? What's the big difference? The one major difference that makes our product superior. So I'm like, all this stuff is the same. And it's been the best thing I've ever done for my copywriting.
Wow. So because you're really learning the laws of language and communication, right?
Yeah.
It's just being intentionally used in a different way. And I'm sure comedy can also help with copy too. If you can make something somewhat funny or more engaging that way, people probably enjoy that.
Well, rule number one is if you speak on someone else's stage, always make fun of the host. That is always a good one. It's just a good way to build community. Like, you see comics will do this. They won't necessarily they might make fun of the club and where they are, or they might do a little crowd work to build community. But the easiest way to build community on a stage is just go after the host in a obviously lighthearted way. So that's a good one. And we talked to Jeff at the last meeting. We talked a little bit about this. If you were going to do a presentation with a sales pitch somewhere in there, you probably want to be funny at the beginning and then slowly be less funny as you get to the actual offer. So comedy, like literally with a setup and a punchline, the setup is designed to build tension. And so the reason you hear comics all the time talking about sex or race or politics is because it builds so much tension. With sex, people have all these hang-ups. So when somebody goes on that topic, people just builds a lot of tension in the audience. And then the punchline, because there's more tension, the punchline hits harder. But with marketing, we obviously are building up tension as well. And then we don't want to relieve that tension with a joke. You want to keep it, because obviously relieving the tension is buying the thing. It's better early when you want to sort of connect with the audience and build up your likability, but then you probably want to sort of ease off the gas a little bit on the jokes.
And for everyone listening at home, one thing, as much as it pains me to say nice things about Will is a phenomenal copywriter. He's a phenomenal copywriter, and he's phenomenal just with marketing psychology. So what he just said is absolutely gold. When you're building up to a sale, there is a tension building because it involves money, and money is one of those tense topics. It also involves someone stepping up into a new version of themselves, and there's a lot of tension there. And you have to be able to hold that tension as you make your offer. And the release of the tension is when they buy. And so, yeah, if you threw humor in right as you're about to say what the price is for whatever you're offering, you're going to kill your conversion. So I think what Will just said is 100% on. Humor is a great way to build connection and to gain interest and to hold interest earlier on in a presentation. But yeah, when it gets to time to make the offer, it's not time for jokes.
How do you think about it from a business perspective of holding that tension? Like, for somebody who's new to copywriting, how would they know if what they're saying is, say, amplifying or taking away the tension? Obviously, a joke is one thing that might take away from it, but outside of that, like, how do I know I'm keeping the tension or making it on a trajectory that leads to wanting that sale?
So I think tension is pointless if nobody wants your product. So I spend infinitely more time focused on the product itself, because if it's cool and people recognize, like, oh my gosh, I want this thing, I can see it delivering the result, then that will sort of build the tension on its own, if that makes sense. Like, people want this thing. So it's not like some ninja, like, let me hypnotize you into buying my product. It's more, I would use these techniques to clearly explain what my product is and what result is it. What problem am I solving? What result am I delivering? And then how does my product deliver that result? So this is where you would use all the various comedy techniques or just copywriting techniques to clearly explain those three things. You can go watch this actually on YouTube. Just type in like Cindy Crawford, meaningful beauty. but their whole, and this thing did like hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, but their whole pitch for like why their thing works and why it's so good for your skin was basically, it was ridiculous. Like in a way, when you look at it, it's like there's a melon in the south of France and this melon doesn't age. And then they just show a split screen of over a time lapse of like a normal melon, whatever that means, a non-Southern France melon, next to the melon that they use to create this cream. And then they do a 14-day time lapse, and the normal melon on the left like shrivels up and gets rotten, and then the one on the right stays firm. And so fundamentally, that's the compare and contrast driving their marketing. And it can be something as simple as that. They're just creating a compare and contrast. I mean, the other one, the good one, Jeff, why don't we use Jeff? We'll use you because you're a perfect example of this, is when you talk about the sideways sales letter, you show a normal sales letter and then you just literally turn it on its side. So you're comparing the normal sales letter where you scroll all the way to the bottom, see the price, you bounce, and you're like, well, we're going to turn this on its side and then deliver it over 10 days. And then simply this little tweak, delivering it over 10 days is why people buy. And so that's a very simple compare and contrast you use to explain what a launch is. Everybody sees that. They're like, oh my gosh, I got it. I understand why this works.
And what's also kind of inherent in that is the need to really understand your market so that you can give the right kind of examples, right? And know how to compare and contrast the correct things that will resonate with your audience, right? I would say
to Jeff, if Jeff had just said, this is the sideways sales letter, and you only talked about that, it would not hit as hard as if you had not first compared it to the familiar thing that everybody was aware of and be like, it doesn't work because people scroll to the bottom to see the price, they're out. And so I think that's an example of using technique to make the offer more valuable, clearer, first of all, but then more valuable. Going back to your initial question of how do you create tension, a lot of the time is just clearly explaining something so that people see it working for them, and then now they want it, and that creates the quote unquote tension that is released with the sale.
Are there any practical uses of, say, humor beyond just sort of splicing it into your copy, but are there other practical uses of humor that you found useful in business? I'm thinking maybe building relationships with key people, or even showing up at a mastermind and, being able to connect with people at a different level.
Well, surprisingly, I've burned a lot of relationships with my humor. I can think of like two in particular where people are like, oh, I don't like these jokes at all. And then that's the end. But most of the time, it's probably like a 98% hit rate. It does pretty well. There's been a couple, I guess we just don't have the same sense of humor. But yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think the one of the reasons, it's not why I did it, but I'm aware of it, is when you know how to turn like literally anything into a joke, you can take your presentation and just make it funny using technique. And so then in a professional setting, if you're able to be funny, and obviously appropriately funny on stage, like if you're at a lawyer's convention, obviously you're got to be careful about the kind of jokes you're making, but you'll stand out from everybody else because it's just not a skill a lot of people have. I understand how it is helpful in certain contexts. Yeah, for sure.
A lot of our listeners and watchers, they're aspiring to be entrepreneurs, they're aspiring to get themselves out there, right? And that in many ways means being in the front stage and getting themselves in front of people, saying things to the camera or whatever that happens to be, or maybe posting social media, asking for emails. Being in stand-up comedy, you're having to overcome that fear of going on stage every single time.
Sure.
So I'm curious, like, what advice could you give to people who maybe have that fear of getting themselves out there and putting themselves in a position where they might be really seen?
Yeah, the first part of my answer is actually not helpful at all, because like I play tennis and I play with my buddies and we play matches, but I'm not competing in tournaments. And stand up for me, when you get up on stage, replicates that feeling of competing. You don't want to be adversarial with your audience, but sometimes you get up there and you feel like you're competing a little bit with them to be like, to get that laugh, right? And you're absolutely nervous when you go up there because, you know, any night you could bomb. I try and lean into that, even though it's not necessarily a pleasant emotion. So I don't know if that's not a helpful answer because most people don't, I feel like, want to feel that way. I remember the first time I put some stuff on the internet, like, you know, back in 2007, you'd get some haters, right? Some people just leaving comment. The one I still get this. It's actually I think it's pretty funny. Like this guy looks like Lee Harvey Oswald. Dude, I get that. Like people still, I've like screenshotted all of them. But people would be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. And back in 2007, like, this was actually early in the hater game. So you're like, why are people saying mean things about me on the internet? Like now it's like a normal thing, but you put yourself out there, you're going to get haters. And the first couple, maybe it stings a little bit, but after a couple more years, like, I don't really care. Like, why would I care about this person? This is a person who's watching my stuff, taking time out of clearly a day that's not that busy to leave angry comments on a tennis video or somebody, whatever your market is, you're helping somebody with their dog or you're helping them eat healthy or whatever. Like you're trying to provide value, and the type of person that's going to leave a mean comment, that's not someone's opinion that you should worry about whatsoever. And I get that if you've never had that experience, it's easy for me to say, but it might sting the first couple times, and then eventually you're just sort of like, you might start saving them, honestly, because some of them might be kind of funny. You'd be like, oh, I got to hang on to this one.
How do you think about it, Jeff?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same.
I've left a lot of mean comments on Jeff's videos, just anonymously, obviously.
No, I mean, I think Will summed it up right there so well. It's like, yeah, it's like, you know, if there's people that I care about and I respect their opinion, yeah, I care about what they think. I care about their feedback. But if it's just some random person, especially like Will said, if they're going to sit there and watch an entire video and they don't have anything better to do than leave a derogatory comment, it's one thing to give feedback, but it's another thing just to try to tear you down. Then it's like you sort of have to pity their life. If that's what their life amounts to, is like watching YouTube videos and just leaving, hateful comments. It's like, yeah, that I don't really care what this person thinks.
There's probably no faster way to get good at creating quality content than just cranking it out and honestly, like it probably the more polished you make it, it takes longer. So I would get less polished content up and get feedback, because people will leave you constructive feedback, especially if you ask for it. They're like, hey, what can I do better? And people will leave you nice comments. And so I would just ignore the noise, but the actual helpful comments are going to make you better. The faster you can get that stuff out there, the quicker you'll improve.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like when I was coming up with the second edition, the new edition of my book, I went and read all the 1-star reviews of my first edition. And, and a lot of them were just like complete idiots, but a lot of them were like, oh yeah, I could improve that. I could make that better. And the second edition was better for having gone and read those 1-star reviews on Amazon.
Yeah, most of those are mine as well.
There's been a theme here. Well, and Chris, I just want to point this out, because sometimes you have to point out the obvious, and that's this idea of peak performance, which, Chris, earlier we were talking about Martina and the Bryan brothers, and you were making the parallels. It's not just about how to be a tennis champion. This also applies to entrepreneurs. And so I just want to underline that. And that's why I'm asking Will, and then we look at Will, and when he decided to start doing comedy, he didn't just watch a YouTube video or two. He had not one, but two coaches, right? Because
I got two. Yeah.
Matt was coaching you. Your weekly meeting with Jerry Corley. You've been doing that for years now. So like Will is someone who is incredibly accomplished, has built this amazing business. And so like, okay, now he's going to go into something else that is not, it's not his area of expertise. What does he do? He goes and gets coaches and he works on it regularly. Then he puts himself out there on stage in comedy clubs. And so I personally am absolutely fascinated by peak performance, and I study it because I'm like, those things directly translate to business and every other area of your life, to how you show up in your relationships, to your parenting, to how you show up in any athletic training or anything. The peak performance, it just absolutely translates. And we've been talking around it quite a bit throughout this whole thing. The other place I love, like, well, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this, or you say, I know you study a little bit of military history, I think. And I'm like fascinated by special forces, the Navy SEALs, the British SAS, Delta Force, on and on. I just am fascinated by those guys because they are all about absolute peak performance, because of the downside, if they don't perform, is death. Any thoughts about that? Because you've seen it over and over in athletics, you pursued it in athletics.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was just remembering one of the things that Bryan said as they were coming up, like when they were playing in the juniors, and that's like, they're 14, 15, and they were struggling to adapt to the speed of the game, and then they ended up becoming like the best junior doubles team in the world. And then they go to college. They played at Stanford, and they were just blown with the speed of the game was so fast. They were on their heels the whole time. And then they finally they figured it out. And then the same thing happened when they went to the pros, and oh my gosh, the speed of the game. They ended up becoming the GOATs. So I think with anything, when you're talking about peak performance, it's just like you got to put in the reps. Sometimes you put stuff out there that's not necessarily, I think it was Mr. Beast who said it, who was talking about, speaking of a guy who's like, he's an interesting, like really sharp guy, but he was basically saying like, the way I think about making videos is I want to look back on the video I made 6 months ago and like be embarrassed at how bad it was compared to what I'm doing right now, which is just such an interesting mindset of improvement, right? It's just always trying to outdo what you've done before. But Chris, you were saying earlier about habits. Like I try and niche it down into like, what's the very small habits that you start stacking on top of each other that produces this progress. And I know I suffered from this. When you're looking at building a business or anything, it can get so overwhelming if you think about everything you have to do or where you're trying to go, that it becomes paralyzing to even take that first step. So very athlete mindset is like, you put the blinders on, you're like, what's the very first step in front of me? It's the reason you hear all these players, whether it's tennis or basketball, it's like, we're just focused on the next game in front of us. And it's become like a trope at this point because everybody says it, but it's true. It's like, you just got to focus on that next game, that next step, whatever that is for anybody listening to this, wherever you are, that next step is the most important step. And it's when you start taking them, it's pretty interesting to see how quickly you end up improving.
I think a lot of people get nervous, obviously, say going on stage, right? Or having to put their content out there or doing these kind of things. And I'm curious how you might describe this, but that's a feeling, right? Like, is peak, and part of what the success is getting past that initial fear or that initial feeling, in a sense, being willing to maybe not put out the best possible thing that you might be watching. Like, oh, I'm not going to be the top star comedian the first time I go on stage, right? I'm not going to be Dave Chappelle the first time I go on stage. That's a decades-long process to get there. So who you compare yourself to really matters. And what I love about what you just said was you're kind of suggesting you should only compare yourself to who you just were or what you were just doing, and not to what every other person is who's trying to do what you're doing, or maybe every other piece of content out there that you're looking at and saying, well, I'm not that, so why even try, So I think there's real wisdom in, like you said, the blinders, and also like being very conscious about who you are comparing yourself to. And is there any advice on, say, like on how to maintain those blinders? Because it's so hard sometimes to do that, right? Like if you're inundated with content all the time, or you're just like, how do you keep the blinders on for yourself in those situations?
No one really cares about you. Like, you put content on the internet, like no one is sitting around 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, they're like, what did I just watch? I can't even Like people's attention spans are so short, they've forgotten about you as soon as they click away. So it's, you're more concerned about it than the folks that are watching your content. Guess what? If your content bombs, nobody even saw it, and I think one of the key things, I found this out just by accident. And I actually have a very recent good example of this is if you put content out there and people either leave mean comments or no one sees it, whatever, it does not mean the content is bad. It means maybe you just didn't package it the right way, especially with like algorithms, the way they work. So we had a video that I released in early January on YouTube, and it bombed like 2,000 views. I mean, garbage. And it actually took like a lot of time to make and just crickets. So then I was like, you know what? I looked at, the YouTube stats, and there was a retention issue. I think we lost people at the beginning or something like that. And so I took the exact same content and just reshot the video and released it. And now it's pushing 900,000 views. When you put stuff on the internet, you're not only at the mercy of other humans, you're at the mercy of algorithms. So the question about the blinders, like tennis players are very ritualistic in between points because you don't want to get distracted. You want to focus on the next point in front of you. It's sort of baked into that is you will get distracted. And then it's just step one is just recognizing like, oh, I've shifted my focus. And once you recognize that, then you can just shift your focus back to something that is more productive. So it's not, for me at least, it's not about trying to suppress or fight when my focus is shift somewhere else and maybe I feel anxiety or I'm insecure because this person's here and I'm there, whatever those feelings might be. It's just, you just acknowledge them and you don't push back against them because then it becomes like a sort of a cycle where it can actually get worse. But you just acknowledge it and you shift your focus and eventually you're going to forget you were thinking about that stuff and you just kind of keep plowing ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you have to guard what you're letting into your mind, what you're watching. I'm teaching people how to do marketing, how to build their business. And there's approximately a bazillion other people that are doing that. And all of them are in my Instagram feed and all of them are advertising. So like every third post is someone talking about their brand new system. And if I can easily start to watch all that and like, oh my gosh, look, they're doing all the stuff that I'm not doing. I think I'm really good at this, at not comparing to others, at maintaining focus. And yet it is super easy. If I'm in Instagram, go through that and just look at all the people that are competing with me. And some of them, their products might not be the greatest, but their marketing is really, really good. And so it's really easy to feel less than and to feel pulled to playing a game that I don't want to play. So, just be really careful of the inputs that you're accepting into your brain.
Delete Instagram. Jeff, you need to limit your screen time. I think that's the conclusion.
Dude, you remember when everyone was showing their screen time, 4 or 5 meetings ago, and it was like Reed Tracy and had it was like an hour 30, and I was like an hour 45. And
it's pretty good, everyone. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. No, I have social media for work, but I never am on it, except for I guess Reddit technically counts. But I'm pretty good about that because those algorithms will mess with your head.
Yeah. I'm on for to find cat videos to send to my daughter.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good. I've started releasing a lot of anti-pickleball memes on social media, and because it's funny to me. I've never gotten any, it's the most engagement I've ever gotten. Like I'll release an instructional thing and it'll just, no one will watch it. And then I'll be like, pickleball dumb. And just the comments are hilarious because you have tennis players and they hate each other. So I'm clearly contributing to the downfall and the coarsening of our discourse or something.
Well, we always have positive comments on our podcast, but now you just open this up.
I did. There are definitely tennis people and pickleball people listening to this, and I want all the pickleball people to know that I am your enemy.
And I'm gonna just say that I am a tennis player, so I'll leave it there.
Chris, don't say pickleball. We're gonna gang up on you.
I've never played pickleball. I actually have played tennis, so I'll say I'm probably on the tennis side of it.
I think pickleball's awesome
Disagree.
You can, people can, what's awesome about it is people can be having fun in about 10 or 15 minutes. And tennis, you can be having fun in about 1,000 hours.
It does take a while.
True, yeah.
And pickleball is great because you burn almost as many calories as sitting on the couch.
But if you have put in those 1,000 hours playing tennis and you've become accomplished at it, then you're playing a game of beauty and grace.
That is, one of these days I'll get there. It's an unforgiving sport, but that is very true that like pickleball, it's easy to pick up, which is great because then obviously, a little kid can play it with their grandparent or something like that.
Yeah.
And
so many people are now more active than they've been in so long because of pickleball. So
it's actually leading to tons of injuries.
Really?
Yeah, because you're getting lateral changes of, you have to do quick, side to side, and people who aren't used to that. Yeah. And then
knee and ankle.
And then this is a technical thing, but low balls and pickleballs don't bounce that high. You're supposed to bend with your knees, and people bend at their waist. So it leads to a lot of lower back injuries. So there's a very like generic joke that's made the rounds around the internet, but it's basically every time someone starts playing pickleball, an orthopedist buys a boat. It's pretty good. It's not a bad joke.
That's pretty good.
So, Chris, I think Will just said one of the magic words there.
This seems like a perfect time for a 2-minute taco break. And this is where we ask some taco-related questions. We start off mild and we get a little spicier as we go along with them. These will slowly, like I said, they start off mild, they go a little bit spicier. And so we're going to start off with this taco question that we tend to ask everybody. We'll start off with hard shell or soft shell tacos.
Yes.
If you had to pick one, though, which one would it be?
Yes.
So both together. That's my perfect taco.
There you go. Yeah, there's something. Isn't that a gordita or something? Or what's a Taco Bell? I don't know. There's something that exists. They
got something like that for sure. For sure.
That's a tough one. I'd probably say in a pinch, crunchy taco.
Oh, we're getting into the people who like hard tacos for once.
They took us to season. What season are we in now, Chris?
3, I think.
We're in season 3. We're finally getting the hard shell people.
But I have a very specific reason for that is because the hard shell is like you can only fit so much in it, and you kind of know ahead of time because you see like the shape. Like there's only so much I can get in there. Where with the soft shell, you put too much stuff in there, and then it's just collapsing as you're trying to eat it, and then other people start watching you eat this collapsing taco, and then you get self-conscious about how you're eating it, and then that obviously your technique gets bad, so it gets even sloppier, and then you never get invited back. So
bad taco technique.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spend years developing the perfect technique.
So would you want a spicy taco or more of a mild taco?
Absolutely. I have 2 things in my fridge right now. I have sunblock and I have mayonnaise. So, and sometimes I get them mixed up.
Why do you have sunblock in your?
Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to, Jeff. So absolutely no spice whatsoever.
Gotcha. Are you pro guacamole or no guacamole?
Oh, you gotta have guac. Gotta have guac.
We're still 100% on that too. Jeff's the only person who doesn't have the guac.
Interesting. This is the worst podcast I've ever been on, guys. Never listen to another one of these podcasts. This is garbage. This is a bad person.
What's the most tacos you've ever eaten in one sitting?
Okay, I actually have a very good answer for this. And so I was, in college, I was in a fraternity called Kappa Sig. And one of the pledge events was called Run for the Border. And so all the pledges would get in teams of like, let's just say 3. And we would go to Taco Bell, and you had to eat everything on the menu. Your team had to eat everything on the menu. And it was one of the worst days of my life. And the next morning was also not good. So the answer to that question is 1/3 of Taco Bell's menu is how many tacos I've eaten in one sitting.
Awesome. Jeff, do you want to answer that? We haven't asked that one. I don't know.
Nothing like Will, probably 4.
That's weak, dude.
Yeah.
That's weak.
I'm sorry.
Put up some numbers. Would you rather have a taco that tastes like your favorite dessert or a dessert that tastes like your favorite taco?
What if I don't eat dessert?
Well, I think then that
I don't eat dessert, so that's
neither of them, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably an NA.
Probably a taco that tastes like my favorite dessert. I mean, we do have our special restaurant here in Durango where they have their Tuesday tacos, and the tradition is you put honey on your taco, and that sounds, it's pretty extraordinary.
Choco tacos are pretty good. I haven't had one in like 15 years, but that's like the ice cream taco, right? It's a dessert. I think it's just taco with like a layer of chocolate and then vanilla ice cream. That's legit, but that's both.
So if you could eat tacos with any sports star, who would you choose to have that taco meal with?
Oh, I'll go with Roger Federer. That's lame. I was trying to think of a joke, and everything I came up with wasn't appropriate, so I'll go with Fed. Fed would be cool. Fed's a good one. I mean, I've never met him before, so he'd be a cool dude to just sort of chat about whatever.
Yeah, it seems like he's got life figured out pretty good.
Yeah. When you got a forehand like that, it's you're going to be in a good spot.
But I mean, just his game is incredible. But also, it seems like he makes his family a really big priority.
So I have heard, like you're wondering, so I've never met him, but it's always a question of like front stage versus backstage. Is this person the same person that is put out there into the world? And I've literally never heard anybody speak a crossword about Roger. They're like, he's the exact same. He's exactly what you would expect. He's the nicest guy. He makes time for everybody. I mean, he just sounds like basically the best dude out there.
And you're getting a bit of an inside perspective there because Will does know many of the pros.
Yeah, there's some people you're like, would not have tacos with you. I'd throw tacos at you, but...
If you could have tacos with any comedian, who would you want to have tacos with?
It would be a toss-up between Dave Chappelle and Anthony Jeselnik.
Excellent joke crafters. Absolutely. Yeah. What about you, Jeff? Do you have a comedian?
I would say Chappelle, and the one I've been watching quite a bit lately is Taylor Tomlinson.
She's great.
She's great. Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for the 2-minute taco break. That was great. To wrap this episode up, we've been talking about peak performance and comedy and business and all that, but most of our listeners, they're not in the same level as both of you right now as far as, business yet. They're aspiring to get their first business off the ground or their first product. They're looking to, we're calling this show Dare to Launch, right? So what I'd love to have you do is just some final thoughts on why should those people dare to launch?
Best thing I could say is just, my story is a great example of why you should do it. I still, that we took the product we had that was sort of limping along and just using PLF and launching it. Like I said, it was $35,000 in a week. It was, I still can't believe it. It was crazy. So there's no doubt that it works. You just gotta do the work to stand it up and get it out there. And I know that having, when you haven't launched a business and when you haven't sold anything yet, there's the mental game aspect to it of making that leap, which is challenging, but also kind of, the athlete in me would be like, reframe it. It's like kind of exciting. Like you're embarking on this cool journey and you don't necessarily know where it's going to take you. And that can be fun sometimes because the assumption is like, oh, the twists and turns, they might be bad, but some of them are pretty cool and you wouldn't necessarily anticipate, but you won't know what they are and you won't experience that until you actually go for it. So just gotta do it, man.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto the show today and sharing a lot of wisdom in different areas. Where could people, if they wanted to learn more about you or, get training videos in tennis, where could they go?
Just come visit us at fuzzyyellowballs.com. Just don't get the name mixed up and go to yellowfuzzyballs.com because that is not a tennis website.
Well, thanks so much, Will. And thank you, listeners, for listening to today's show. We hope this conversation inspires you to dare to launch.